Hey everyone, Nicky Skevich back with Daily Fantasy Winners. It's week 11 of this NFL season, and so for this video, just going to do the usual giving out a play here at each position. Somebody I like for GPPs this week, certainly, and definitely specifically GPPs, not cash formats. And so we'll just get right on into it. And so for quarterback, I like Derek Carr this week. A handful of reasons. Number one, obviously the New England's Patriots defense is still very bad. Their offense is amazing, but their defense still isn't doing very well. If you do take a look at the Patriots here defensively, they are still dead last in yards per play allowed, allowing 6.5 yards. Each play, they're allowing 5 yards carry and 7.8 yards per pass attempt. So they're dead last overall, dead last against the run, and second to last against the pass. I think the Colts are the one team that is still in dead last. Yeah, they're still dead last, and so. In any case, taking a looking at the game here with Oakland, this is an Oakland Raiders team right now that is 13th in yards per pass attempt. They're pretty good. It's been a lot better as of late over the last few weeks, especially since they've gotten Crabtree back healthy, and they've been going up against some easier defenses here as of late. And if you do take a look at Oakland here, as I slide all the way over here to the side, they're throwing at the 7th most this year, and especially in a game here where they're going against the Patriots, which is a neutral site game where they'll be playing in Mexico City. This is a game where I think we're going to see a pretty high-scoring game, obviously. A couple defenses that aren't doing particularly well, especially New England's, and obviously New England with the better offense. But Oakland will probably be throwing it quite a bit to kind of keep up with New England, probably going to be a higher-scoring game. And so, in any case, it's a spot where I really like Derek Carr there. If you do take a look at kind of Derek Carr in his last few weeks, it's a little bit interesting. So, 3 weeks ago, he had his game against the Kansas City Chiefs, where he it was the Thursday night game, and so he had 30.18 fantasy points. He led that comeback with the game-winning touchdown pass. There were all those penalties at the end, and then they finally got it in with Crabtree. It was by far as far as I can remember, the best Thursday night game probably, maybe ever of Thursday night football. I don't know, but at least in the last year or two. But in any case, so he had 30.18 fantasy points on FanDuel. Obviously, a little bit more on DraftKings because he threw for 417 yards. Had 3 touchdown passes in that game. If you take a look at the last 2 games, he only put up 14.52 fantasy points and 14.7. And so a guy that might be a little bit, I don't want to say under the radar, because I'm sure there will be some people that use him, but he only had 1 touchdown pass in each of those last 2 games against the Dolphins and the Bills. But he threw for 300 yards against the Dolphins and 313 yards against the Bills. And so that's obviously, the passing yards are definitely there for Oakland. This is a spot that Oakland should be throwing a lot. And so I just think because the touchdown passes maybe weren't there necessarily, and he didn't have those huge monster games kind of as of late, he won't be owned maybe quite as much as people think. It'll especially help that Drew Brees is kind of around the same price point, especially going at home against Washington. Then there's some other good quarterbacks, like Kirk Cousins is right there in the same range. I'm sure some people will use him because everyone's thinking it's an indoor game, going to have to keep up with the Saints offense and everything like that. I'm sure some people will use Dak Prescott at home just because with Zeke Elliott out, even though I guess Dak didn't have the greatest game last week, obviously. But and I'm sure some people will use Carson Wentz. So anyways, there are a lot of good quarterbacks this week. I think Carr might just kind of have some depressed ownership here, and so could be a good spot to use him. Okay, so moving on to the running back spot. This is a good idea, I think, for Jordan Howard here in GPPs. He obviously gets a huge workload here with the Bears offense. Chicago is they were second. Now it looks like they're third. They are the third most, some terrible scrolling on my part. They are the third most run-heavy team right now. They were second, I think, last week or 2 weeks ago. But again, Chicago is a very run-heavy team, as we've seen here over the last handful of weeks. They have a pretty decent defense that's kind of helping them keep them in games right now. Yeah, Chicago 10th in yards per play allowed. So Chicago's got a decent defense that usually has been keeping them in games, and they've been shorting the games and running the ball a lot with Howard and the other backs. But Howard obviously gets the majority of the work right now. This is going up against a Lions defense that isn't very good. They're average against the run and a little below average against the pass, but still, just the Lions defense isn't very good overall. It is in Chicago, which obviously helps. It's going to be outdoors and everything like that, so Chicago probably going to be even a little more run heavy and some potentially bad weather, because Chicago's obviously, it's going to be cold this time of year, and Chicago's usually a little bit more one of the windier spots, especially where that stadium is located, kind of right there up against Lake Michigan. And so In any case, so I think it's a nice spot for Jordan Howard. Moving on to wide receiver, if you're going to pair, if you want to pair a wide receiver with Derek Carr, like I mentioned, so obviously Amari Cooper and Michael Crabtree are your two guys you're looking at. I tend to lean usually, in my advice, I guess, is toward Crabtree. I always laugh kind of at the projections, looking at some different places of what the projections are for like kind of Cooper and Crabtree, and sometimes they have them even, sometimes they have Crabtree a couple points more, and sometimes it's Cooper a couple points more, and a lot of the time it's literally just recency bias, has nothing to do with like matchup. I mean, once in a while it can obviously, but for the most part, a lot of times you just look and it's a complete recency bias thing. I just think it's perfectly fair to say like that these two should be projected usually for about the same each week, but in GPPs I do tend to like Crabtree a little bit more, just because Crabtree, I really hate the fact, I think Amari Cooper does, the drops issue kind of goes back for him all the way to his days at Alabama. If you watched Amari Cooper at Alabama, he was obviously outstanding. He was one of the best receivers in college football, during his senior year in 2014, I believe it was. But in any case, he still had like some drop issues in college, and Crabtree, he does get targeted obviously more in the red zone, and that seems to be a consistent thing here over the last several years, or when they've been playing together. And so I look at Crabtree as a slightly higher upside play. There isn't like a ton of data to support that, but he is a little bit of a higher upside in that sense. And I do think people in general just view Amari Cooper as a better wide receiver than Michael Crabtree, and so it's one of those things where I always just say I slightly lean toward Crabtree and GPPs. That's just usually what I recommend whenever it comes to one of the Raiders wide receivers, and that's matchup pending, of course, if there's something that like one of these guys is going to be shadowed by somebody. But I don't think there's anything important here as far as New England goes in shadowing wide receivers here. So I just like Crabtree here for that pairing. But but as far as like who is like my favorite GPP wide receiver this week, it is Keenan Allen. He hasn't had a good week the last few weeks. Obviously, he went up against the Jags defense last week in the most bizarre game of atrocious coaching and decision making by both teams of the Chargers and the. I shouldn't say it's all the decision making. I mean, the Chargers fumbled obviously to give the Jags life, but that was something else. But in any case, so Keenan Allen, he had a tough matchup that week. They played the Broncos like a couple or a few weeks ago, and the Broncos pass defense typically is pretty good. At least they were really strong, obviously, earlier on, just a few weeks ago, as opposed to like the last week or two. But in any case, Keenan Allen is way too good of a receiver. This is a much better situation being at home against the Buffalo Bills. And the one thing I really like here about the Bills is obviously the Bills defense has been regressing, actually. Obviously, against the Saints last week, they gave up a bajillion points. And they've kind of been regressing over the last couple of weeks. But the one thing here that I also like is, from Keenan Allen's standpoint, is I think the Chargers are going to have the ball a lot in this game. I think that the Bills, the fact that they're benching Tyrod Taylor and going to Nathan Peterman is, I think it's atrocious. It's like the Bills, if you look, actually, I'll just show you this quickly. The Bills on offense right now, they are 30th in yards per play. They are 24th in yards per carry right now, and 24th in yards per pass attempt. Their offense isn't very good, obviously, but the thing is you have one of the best running backs, and you've got a mobile quarterback. Usually, you should have a much better yards per carry than that. And really, the Bills' offensive line in terms of running the ball hasn't been very good. So I think the problem's really Tyrod's not having that bad of a season. I just think it's just so bizarre. I think generally a lot of people, NFL people on Twitter, thought that this was really bizarre, and I tend to agree with that. Anyways, maybe Peterman will be decent. I don't know. I thought he was just average in college. I watched him actually a decent amount when he played at Pitt his last 2 years, but I'm not really seeing it here in this spot. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And so, anyways, this is a nice spot, I think, here for Keenan Allen for a big bounce back this week. It's essentially a positive regression thing for Keenan Allen because he's a really good wide receiver and finally has a better matchup. Okay, anyways, tight end. I do like CJ Fedorowicz this week. I know he didn't have the greatest game last week, just from a fantasy points perspective, but this time Houston will be going up against an Arizona Cardinals defense that has been it's been hanging in there. It's actually been okay, but they're definitely worse against the pass than the run this year. If you take a look here, they're 6th against the run and 18th against the pass. The one thing you should know about the 18th against the pass, and I'm pretty sure I've maybe mentioned this in the video before with a matchup thing, but the Cardinals are very good against the pass when it comes to Patrick Peterson everywhere else, they stink. That's continued to hold true. And so with the Texans situation, Will Fuller has been ruled out. Now, so obviously we would expect Patrick Peterson, and it seems like I think the reports are that that's going to be the case. Patrick Peterson's going to be shadowing DeAndre Hopkins, so that's obviously going to be the tougher spot for Hopkins. And so somebody else is definitely going to have to pick up the workload here in terms of the pass game, and usually the safety blanket for the Texans here over the last couple of years, when he hasn't been injured, of course, is C.J. Fedorowicz. And the one thing that is nice that we just saw last week, kind of as an ultimate confirmation thing, is that Fedorowicz did play 90% of snaps last week. That's a big thing. We just wanted to make sure that, obviously Fedorowicz, they weren't going to play him a smaller amount just in case, even though he's coming off a concussion. It wasn't like rehabbing a knee or something, something like that. Not to say that the concussions aren't important, but just in terms of like a snap percentage when you come back, it was one of those things where you didn't expect him to be like out of shape or something. Anyways, good spot for Fedorowicz there, I think, who will be on the cheaper side, and so you won't have to pay that much for him. And so in any case, on to the defenses. Look, obviously the Jaguars are going to be the #1 defense this week. They're playing the Browns, even though it's on the road, but it just makes perfect sense that, they're going to be the highest projected. And so some other defenses that are, I think, reasonable in GPPs, but the one I actually kind of like the most here, and I think look, I really do like the Rams offense a lot, kind of as much as anybody. I think it's awesome that Sean McVay's has kind of turned this offense around like that. I think it's just a huge credit to him, and because he's not only the head coach, he's the offensive coordinator and the play caller, so he definitely deserves a good amount of credit here for this offensive turnaround. But I will say this: the Vikings are at home, and they are #3. I'll just show this here. The Vikings are #3 in yards per play allowed. They're very good against the run and very good against the pass. And again, and the Vikings do sack a lot of people usually. I think they're top 10 in sacks right now. The Rams typically, they've been pretty good at protecting Goff this year. I will say, though, that the Rams really haven't faced that many good pass rushes this year. And so it's one of these things where I do think it's one of those spots where, because it's in Minnesota, they have a good pass rush, maybe a little bit of a scheduling thing, and maybe just a little bit of recency. I don't want to say recency bias, but everyone's just kind of going with the momentum, I guess you call it, of that the Rams are playing very well and that their offense looks great. And so it's just a thing. I think their ownership won't be that bad. And obviously the Vikings defense, as we've seen in the past, definitely has a good amount of upside. So that's a one defense I would probably my favorite defense I would pivot to, though, off of the Jaguars for a top projected or just a good spot for defense in GPPs. That's it for this week. Thank you for watching. I hope Max and I will be doing a video tomorrow night. We will see if we're going to get on the right schedule for that. But in any case, I think we will. But we'll see. Anyways, thanks for watching. I'm @NickYuskevich on Twitter. DailyFantasyWinners is on Twitter, @DFantasyWinners. And then if you like these videos and you're enjoying this, please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All right. Good luck, everyone.